All right. Dr. Green, I'm glad you're with us today because it's neat to have someone who has experience dealing with patients on this issue, which means you can kind of cram it into the language for lay people. And so I want to kind of just orient us a little bit. When did genomic medicine or personalized medicine, whichever term you prefer, when did people sort of realize that that would be possible?
Well, I think the concept's been around for quite a while, and you'll find that doctors sometimes bristle at the whole notion of personalized and precision medicine because they say, you know, my patient in front of me, I've been practicing this for a long time. But certainly with the lowering in cost of genomics, that's been the leading edge, I think, of personalized and precision medicine, although I think everyone agrees it encompasses much more than just genomics. I would say genomic medicine is really launching now. And that is in part because we are seeing how useful this can be for diagnosing rare conditions, and we are in a very active debate about whether using genomic information in ostensibly healthy people can actually help them with their health for the rest of their lives.
Have there been, since the idea was first floated, say, decades ago, to now when you're really starting to see genomic medicine kind of take hold, have there been hype cycles that have kind of hurt your ability to communicate with patients and make them feel like maybe their hopes are being, boosted?
Absolutely. And I don't know so much if they were deliberate hype cycles as they were an epiphenomenon of the way that genomics rolled out. So for example, the very first genes to be discovered in many cases were the Huntington disease genes. Mm-hmm. And Huntington disease turns out to be one of the rare conditions where if you have the mutation, it's 100% that you're going to get the disease. Right. So we got this notion of genetics as deterministic, highly deterministic. And then it hasn't helped that all of the CSI shows always get the DNA at the crime scene, and they more often than not get it right. But in point of fact, genomics is more about risk variance. It's more related to all of medicine than I think most people realize. The vast majority of genetic variation connotes a certain risk or protection for disease, but is not, in fact, deterministic. And now that has added to a kind of hype cycle because everybody thought, oh, genetics is so deterministic. If we get your genes for something, for cancer, for heart disease, we're going to absolutely be able to predict whether you're going to get it or not. And that turns out not to be so. Now, in addition to that, there are, of course, hype cycles stimulated by different industry hopes and promises. Sure. And we have seen some of that. But that's where I think work like ours comes in. My work is really designed to try to suss out the evidence for clinical utility in using genomics.
Well, can you give us a sense for the state of the art? What are the kind of most exciting things happening in genomic medicine?
I would say that there are several large-scale studies. Maybe the best known one is the Geisinger experience, where Regeneron has supported the sequencing of, I think at last count, over 200,000 individuals within the vertically integrated Geisinger healthcare system. And they are returning 76 genes worth of information to almost everyone. And they are trying to follow what this means in terms of additional diagnosis, what it means in terms of additional costs, and in terms of downstream health benefits or harms. Our own MedSeq project has been the first randomized trial. Now remember, Geisinger is an observational study. They don't have a control group. We elected to try to actually do a control group, so we have a much smaller, just several hundred individuals who we have randomized to get whole genome sequencing or not, and are following them long-term, both a sick cohort and a healthy cohort, to see what kind of impact this has on their health care, their costs, their downstream benefits or harms. And make no mistake, there is a potential for harm here. Even in something like genomic sequencing, you could identify people who have a very modest risk of something, and you could over-treat them, over-monitor them in ways that could harm them down the road. So this really has to be worked out with evidence.
Huh. And what are the, you were sort of speaking in abstract tones about what kind of benefits we might see and what kind of new treatments we might see. Sketch a little for the future. I mean,
sure.
I know it's speculative at this point.
So if we sequenced everyone in this room, we'd find a number of individuals who were carrying a mutation for cancer predisposition. And you might say that's a good thing, because then I could have family history evaluation, I could get x-rays, I could check for cancer along the way, maybe catch it earlier. And I think most people would tend to agree with that, although again, there's not solid proof that that's a benefit. We'd also find a few people with a long QT mutation, which would put you at increased risk for sudden cardiac death. Now, you'd go, oh my gosh, maybe I better get that checked out. You'd get an EKG, maybe that's normal. You'd get an echo, maybe that's normal. Then what do? Do you actually go the rest of your life with this cloud of concern over your head? Do you actually have a implantable defibrillator implanted, which carries its own morbidity? We're really at a loss as to what to do at that point if you're carrying some of these mutations. We know that your risk is increased, but we don't really know exactly how much.
Whenever I talk to physicians, one of the common sort of refrains that I hear is that you have the new self-diagnosing patient who sort of shows up in the office with a stack of printouts from WebMD. Has that reached genomic medicine? Are people showing up in your audience just really well educated?
Absolutely. It's been furthered by the direct-to-consumer genetics movement, and I'm a firm believer that everyone should have access to all their health information, including their genomic information. But we have to be realistic and realize that genomics, all of this stuff, but particularly genomics, is complicated. And if we don't provide resources, a safety net for people to get expert information when they need it, they may misunderstand, they may even act on their misunderstandings. So I'm not cavalier about the potential for misunderstanding, but I do firmly believe that the horse is out of the barn. Everyone has a right to their information, and I think everyone who wants it has a right to their genomic information as well.
Are there particular misunderstandings that you see over and over again that are harmful in the same way that you might see with sort of the anti-vax movement?
I think there are not obvious ones yet that I'm aware of. I think that there's, in fact, there's Rebecca Robbins in this room has reported in STAT on the trend toward exercise and diet genomics. And I think that these are examples where a small pearl of evidence has been blown out of proportion by a company that's trying to sell a product. So I think we're really facing a lot of questions about how people are going to interpret small amounts of scientific evidence that are being, if you will, overly interpreted by the companies that are trying to sell a product like exercise facilitation or diet facilitation. It's not that they're truly fraudulent in the sense that they're making all aspects of it up,
Sure.
but they have extended their message and their marketing far beyond where the actual evidence is. And I don't think that's healthy for any of us. I don't think that's good for the field. I think there could be backlashes against that. And I don't think it's good for the rollout of really appropriate, exciting scientific basis for genomic health.
Suppose everyone, starting today, every newborn were to be sequenced. What would that enable? What would the world look like in 20, 30 years from a medicine perspective?
Well, first it would enable tremendous chaos because the public health system is not prepared for all of the questions and false positives. And I mean, those of you—
But just imagine.
Well, it's hard to separate. It's hard to separate the technology from the downstream implementation. And this has been actually this theme, which is that our technology is there and our translation is not yet there, is actually a very important schism in I think what we're talking about in precision and personalized medicine. So setting that aside for the moment, though, I think that there are a certain number of small things that we could predict in babies or in adults that would be really beneficial. So for example, right now we have the capability to do preconception screening and look at all the recessive carrier traits that all of you are carrying. And for those of you who are planning to have babies, that means that you could have a little bit more information about whether you and your partner are going to have a child affected by a recessive disease. Now, some people may not want to know that, but other people may actually want to know that and act on it. And that's available right now. We could screen everybody for recessive carrier traits. Wow. Going back to the babies, though, we have a BabySeq project, which we're going to talk about with Lauren, one of the family enrollees, where we are actually testing the proposition, what happens when you offer individuals the potential to have their newborn baby sequenced. And we're offering this both to very sick babies in the neonatal intensive care and absolutely well babies on the healthy baby unit. And the first surprise is what percentage of people actually agree to participate. So let me just quickly ask, if those of you, put yourself in the place of a family that's just had a baby, you're in the hospital, one of our very charming research assistants comes in and says to you, "Hi, would you like to participate in the BabySeq project where your new baby can get sequenced and you'll have all this information?" How many of you would say yes? Okay, for those at home, that's about 2/3 or 3/4 of the population. In actuality, we're getting 8% of families who are saying yes. And part of it is that they're overwhelmed by having a new child, and it's just a little bit much to ask at that moment. But another part of it is the way our IRB and the FDA have asked us to frame the value proposition, which is pretty negative. We talk a lot about genetic discrimination. We talk a lot about privacy, possible privacy breaches. We talk a lot about the possibility that you'd find out something you really don't want to know, or you'd find out something, like I mentioned, the long QT, where we really don't know what to do with the information. By the time we get finished with that whole thing, you're a little less enthusiastic than when you just raised your hand. Yeah. So this is actually points out an interesting issue in clinical research per se. If we don't know the clinical utility of something, but we want to study it, how do we offer that value proposition in an honest way, but that gets people involved in research? We got to get people involved in research in order to answer these questions. If only 8% of the population involves themselves in research, and it's the most enthusiastic, most highly educated 8%, which it turns out often to be, we're not going to have a very representative sample even to answer the questions.
Well, let's bring on someone from the 8%. This is Lauren Stetson, who was not a direct patient of Dr. Green, but part of said yes.
She did.
Tell us a little about that. Were you like in the delivery room and someone's kind of coming up?
I was in the recovery room, so it was at least a little bit more modest. But yeah, I honestly stopped listening after they told me it wasn't about me feeling better or about my baby specifically. My husband was a little bit more willing to listen to all of what Dr. Green said. So he kind of guided us into that decision. If it had just been me, I would have been like, are you going to make me instantly better after what just happened? No? Bye. So I think that is
Maybe
hard.
That's a tip.
It is. I mean, you know, it's a vulnerable moment for mothers, for sure. Yeah, it was definitely geared. My husband was very interested in the research, and I think what Dr. Green said is really important. If only 8% participate, where are we going to be? You know, if no one's helping. So I think that that was kind of something that definitely we know the more you research, the better off the world will be. So,
did you have any privacy concerns about it?
You know, it's interesting. People have asked that quite a bit recently, and I don't think I made it to that thought process because I was busy with a newborn. But I think that we didn't really think about what would happen if she had been carrying something that would have caused potential concerns in her future in regards to getting employment and things like that for pre-existing conditions. We never got that far.
What do you say, Dr. Green, when someone comes to you with quite potent privacy concerns, one of the 92%, and they're worried about future employment prospects, or that even this data could be subpoenaed potentially? What do you say?
It's tough because you really can't guarantee what's going to be happening, particularly 18 years in the future when this child is an adult. But also Lauren's baby had a finding, which we might want to talk about, which was really interesting and illustrates a lot of the tensions in this whole arena.
Sure.
Is that okay?
No, we're definitely going to get there.
Oh, you're going to get there. Okay, sorry.
But first I want to know, just take you back to this, kind of just passing through this experience. What did your family think?
They didn't, I think when we originally told them, there was a 50-50 chance that we were going to even be tested. And so that was kind of like, oh, Kyle, my husband's name is Kyle, kind of signed us up for this thing in the hospital. We don't really know what's going to happen. And then they came back and said, oh, well, you've been tested. And we were like, oh, this is kind of cool. And the family was like, oh, okay, like, what does it mean? And so we were like, well, we're going to have all this health information that we wouldn't have. And I think to them, it was kind of like,
Great.
Yeah, you know, it didn't really, but it turns out it has affected other people in our family. It is a Pandora's box that we kind of have opened. Cora's grandmother, you know, might potentially benefit from this information. She's been suffering with something for a while, and for her to have this information might lead to new treatments for her. And so it was kind of, I don't think we thought that far out in the long term. You know, we thought, oh, well, if she has something, it's unique to her. We didn't really think.
Well, as Dr. Green points out, I'm sort of burying the lead here. So tell us your story. What did you find out, and how were you able to sort of help your treatment?
So Cora has partial biotinidase deficiency. It's an enzyme disorder, and she tested. Originally on the newborn screening, it was flagged. We tested her again. They said she was fine, and then Genomics called, and they were like, hey, she's not fine. So thank goodness I had Googled as much as humanly possible from before, so when they called, I was not too concerned about what was going on. And we had her tested, and now she just has to take a supplement every day for the rest of her life, which in the case of rare diseases, we hit the jackpot on an easy one, so we're not too stressed about it, but it's definitely good, because if things had come up later in her life, we still would have been like, oh, was it this thing? They said no, you know, and so to have this medicine given to her and know that she will be fine is really fantastic.
What would the diagnosis process have looked like had you not had this test?
We would have waited until she had symptoms of some sort, and then we would have had to deal with them. And the interesting thing about this deficiency is that a lot of the developmental symptoms are irreversible. So if she had delayed speech and things like that, we might have not have caught it in time, which is why they do it on the newborn screening, because most babies don't show developmental delays and things until 3 months. So they try to catch it at infancy so that they can start it, which the original system failed us a little bit here. So she's only partial. You know, they don't know if she would have had a lot of the symptoms that are what make it a very scary disease if you have a full deficiency. But yeah, we definitely are very, very grateful that we decided to participate.
You mentioned your grandmother, and I wanted to ask you, Dr. Green, if you notice a generation gap, both among medical practitioners and the patient community. Are younger people, like Lauren, more amenable to this? Are they into it more?
Absolutely. There's a huge generation gap around the question you raised earlier of privacy. I think many people, I don't know, below 40, feel like privacy is a concept that they aren't ever going to be able to guarantee, and they're okay with that. Whereas I think a lot of medical professionals and a lot of older people are really deeply concerned about privacy and very, very put off by the possibility that it could be compromised.
I agree with that, especially with social media. You know, we talk about the fact that we're posting pictures of our daughter on social media, and she has no say over it. And it's out there in the internet world, and who knows what's going to happen with that in the future. So I think privacy, especially when you said that earlier, I mean, I just don't think it ever occurred to us. Yeah. So.
And Lauren's story also points out something else that I think is worth noting, which is her baby is now kind of an N of one. Her baby clearly has 2 recessive mutations, one from mom and one from dad, clearly has a lower enzyme level, but it's not clear precisely whether that low enzyme level would have been enough to change the developmental delay to cause some of the hair and skin problems associated with this full-blown disease. So it's sort of a partial disease. Now, this baby's getting a vitamin, basically a nutritional supplement, which is not harmful. But this is the kind of scenario we could get throughout this audience if we sequenced you all, and some of the follow-up things would not be so benign. They would be radiation treatments. They would be more invasive monitoring. So she represents something which there was no obvious harm done and potential benefit, but it also represents the ambivalence and ambiguity of the scenario where you've got, we don't even simply know how many people going around with 40% enzyme level would in fact develop symptoms. It's too rare.
This was part of a study. What would it have cost were it not? If this was a service that new parents wanted?
Well, the CEO of Illumina just the other day predicted that whole genome sequencing would drop within a few years, I don't know how many that is, to $100. And then on top of that, interpretation is becoming more and more efficient and effective. It started off with many, many person hours, and I think has been reduced to maybe 10 person hours. So this whole process is getting faster, more efficient, and cheaper. I think it's changing so fast it's hard to say, but we've estimated that at this moment in time, it's about a $5,000 proposition.
Is there a foreseeable future when insurers might cover something like this
Absolutely.
as a standard part of childbirth?
Absolutely. But they will first have to cover it for symptomatic kids and adults, which they do not do currently now. So we've got to fight that battle first. And that would seem to be a battle that's not really so hard, but it is. And then we would have to demonstrate clinical utility on a larger scale than 1 or 2 individuals and show them that this is indeed a good, cost-effective proposition.
I want to open up the audience for questions. Looks like we have one right there.
Hi, my name is Ron DeBellis. I'm the Chief Science Officer at National Organization for Rare Disorders. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You are one of less than 5% of the people who have a rare disorder or whose child has a rare disorder where there is a therapy and it is successful.
Yeah.
I am a huge advocate of the baby sequencing thing. My daughter has a rare disorder. And you mentioned that human genome sequencing is not covered by insurance, which is a huge factor. That coupled with the fact that the Orphan Drug Act is actually under attack regarding pricing. And there's pricing from biopharmaceutical drugs that get lumped in with orphan therapies for people with rare diseases, and they're very exclusive of each other. I was wondering if you can comment on that and how we might be able to keep the orphan drugs separate from some of the more common anti-inflammatory medications that are typically lumped into that category.
Yeah, I'm not very knowledgeable about the policy issues related to that, so I can't comment on that, but I do agree with you that that this is a problem, and that the question of reimbursement for these diseases is all over the map, and it's very difficult. This, of course, Lauren is a research participant, but to sit with a patient and say, you've got a problem or your child has a problem, I'd like to get this genetic testing, but I can't tell you whether your insurance will cover it or you'll be charged up to $12,000 out of pocket. I just can't tell you that. That puts a real damper on the conversation, in addition to whatever you're dealing with in the family. I will also say that rare diseases are rare, but they are collectively not as rare as you might think. Our MedSeq project and now some of the data from BabySeq suggests that if you look broadly, if you don't just look at 70 genes or 1,000 genes, but you look at 4,000 or so disease-associated genes, probably 10 to 15% of us are walking around with a mutation in something. Now, we're not all demonstrating the symptoms. That's part of the questions involved, but we're all walking around with some genetic burden. And who knows what it's doing to our potential. If we had not identified this, and Cora her daughter had turned out to be a poor student in school, no one would have put it together with a biotinidase deficiency. That would have just been, you know, Cora wasn't so smart. Yeah. So who knows what the burden of genetic disease is that we're not even aware of.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, Lauren, your experience makes you such a natural evangelist for this. How have people responded to your story?
I think well, and I think that I always preface it with we're very, very lucky with the results that we received in regards to it being positive and answering questions that we had in the beginning, but also the fact that we did strike out in the rare disease form. You know, we were very, very lucky that we can buy her supplement. We just went to visit my parents. We forgot it. We bought it at Walmart, gave it to that night. So that is something I think that's really a blessing, and I understand that there are other flip sides to that. You know, I think that people need to tread cautiously, like Dr. Green said, but I think that the future is important, that it will be medicine is not being diagnosed because of symptoms. You know, when you have a sick child, I think that's the most terrifying thing as a parent. And so to be able to walk in with more information in the beginning and know that when something arises, you have some sort of basis to go on is just going to be a blessing to everyone. So I think that's what I take from it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Green.
Yeah.